I believe that as you walk through grief, it's important to know kind of a first definition. Author and speaker Brené Brown says, grief is processing several emotions as you attempt to reaffirm or reconstruct a world of meaning and purpose after the loss. There are a few things that I believe are true. Back in my day, we were taught that grief is a linear process that goes through several stages and ends with acceptance. Personally and professionally, I've never had that experience to be true. And so I think instead, when you're processing the emotions, they look like any emotion you could possibly think of pasted on the outside of a ball, and that ball sits on the floor. The emotion on the bottom is what you feel, but a breeze could take it some way. Somebody could pick it up and bounce it, and all of a sudden you're feeling something else right away. And I think that processing emotions in grief can feel like that oftentimes. Once you get through grief, it doesn't mean that it is something that never is a part of your life. It's something that you've now adapted or assimilated into how you experience things. I believe that everybody's experience of grief is unique, but oftentimes research puts them in three very big, broad categories. One type of loss is a sudden or traumatic loss. These are things like losing someone to an accident or a heart attack. Perhaps it's a child that falls into a pool, but it's something that's very traumatic. A lot of times shock and denial are big parts of that type of grief. Then there's a category of anticipatory grief. So these are the griefs that happen because someone is going through a very long illness. Maybe somebody has muscular dystrophy and their ability to be mobile is declining. Maybe it's people who have experienced cancer and they go through a long journey. And sometimes it's dementia, where you watch that loved one continue to move forward and to lose part of who they are. The runway is usually a lot longer, and goodbyes start with the lasts. And so those things I think are super important to understand when you can see the grief coming. The last one is something that the research calls disenfranchised grief. And those are just grief losses that happen, and society may not consider them really grief. I think our society's gotten a lot better with miscarriages for people because there's not a baby and there's not a name, and sometimes there's not a burial in those situations. But disenfranchised grief can include a job loss or divorce or a move. And so I think sometimes just having someone to accept that that is a true loss and that the things that you are experiencing, the emotions you're processing and so forth are just as real. You know, an interesting one about disenfranchised grief is like people who choose a divorce can feel that way. And that seems very counterintuitive. But the fact is, your roles change and your routine changes and your responsibilities change. A lot of financial changes happen. The way that you parent kids can happen. And those types of things, you need someone in your corner that can just say to you, all of those emotions are real. And it's okay to even grieve a loss that you chose. The last thing that I would love to talk about is the fact that I believe that grief is really hard on relationships, especially the ones that are closest to you. And so I think that a few things are just really important when it comes to those relationships. You experience the loss perhaps of the same person, but your relationship to that person is a little bit different. So I would just encourage you, listen well to the other person's journey of grief because it's different than yours, even though they're a loved one too. I think that it's also important to give as much grace as you can to them, even though you don't understand that. At the same time, I think that relationships change, so you need to talk to that person about how your relationship to them has changed and what you want moving forward. I lost a grandparent as early as 12 years old, but then I've also lost my first husband. 5 months after our engagement, he found out he had terminal cancer, and he died 10 months after we got married. Other losses include my father, and then in 2019, my brother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and 2 months later, my sister was. Early 2020, we lost my sister, and in late 2020, we lost my brother. those have impacted everything as far as my family relationships and the difficulties that come when everybody is grieving differently. That side of the family has 28 people, and you can imagine 28 individuals trying to grieve. It looks and feels very difficult. Getting together with that side of the family is awkward and stilted and difficult. But what I have learned, or the things that I've shared, is that I want to give my family members a lot of grace to experience the grief in their own way. And I want to tell them how much their relationship means to me and what I need from them now. I can't just let my family go on grieving in their own way and keep walking apart, but instead to say these relationships are important to me and why. So I want them to know that I love them, but I also need them. I would say no matter whether you have a faith in God or not, that questions of why God come up when it comes to grief and loss. And one thing that I have learned is that God isn't afraid of those questions, and he's not afraid of wrestling with you on the hard things. I don't understand why a father would be taken or a mother would be taken. I don't understand what purpose God has in that in the long haul or how that fits into his plan. But what I do know is that my emotions can be brought to him, and that he'll listen, and that he'll be patient with me as I'm angry, or that I'm super sad, or that I just am so distraught that I don't know what to do. So I have hope that one day I will see my family and those that I've missed, but I'm also very confident that he meets you in the moments, however difficult they are. If you've experienced a loss, please find someone who will listen well to your story, ask you good questions, and encourage you to take steps in your journey. And to those who are loved ones, find a lot of grace with them. Tell them about your expectations in your relationship with them, and move forward.